The following episode contains material that may be uncomfortable, upsetting, and unsuitable for some audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Number 14, West 10th Street, Greenwich Village, Manhattan, New York. On the outside, it's just like any of the other beautiful brownstones on the street. And let me tell you, I actually love the brownstone style of home. When I visited New York, I literally had my sister just take me on a tour of the streets with brownstones. However, on the inside, it holds screeching stairs, a feeling of cold and dread, and ghostly figures. Some past residents say that they couldn't stay in the building longer than a day. Now, I was actually able to visit this spooky space on my first trip to New York in 2022. Sadly, I wasn't able to go inside because it's a private residence, I didn't want to bother anybody. Although I think it would be cool to kind of look around even in just the lobby. But I did take a photo of the outside. But it was just pretty cool to see it in general, because it has quite the history. It was a brownstone home that housed some of New York's most elite bigwigs at the time, but it comes along with some twisted roots. At least 22 people have died in this home, and some under mysterious circumstances, and at least one ghastly murder. This week's episode is The House of Death. Hello, fellow fiends. Welcome to another episode of Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces. I am your host, Cassie Opea. Don't forget, you can catch me on your favorite podcast listening platform and or YouTube every Tuesday with some of the creepiest and spookiest content. If you subscribe to the Patreon or the Spotify for just as little as $5 a month, you get bonus episodes every other week. You get a merchandise discount, good for any purchase at the Wick and Faye shop at pizzaandpigtails.com. You also get my undying love and appreciation and a little box of Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces swag to say thank you. If you would like to support without subscribing, I do have the Cash App and the Venmo, and any little bit helps, whether it be $1, whether it be $2, $5, Also, I'm thinking about purchasing bonus episodes. Like if you can't subscribe, but you want to maybe hear one of the bonus episodes that I have available, you could possibly do like a $2 per bonus episode. Also, to help out the podcast, buying merch in the Wick and Faye shop at pizzaandpigtails.com, just visiting the website in general, socials, follow on that, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and liking, commenting, sharing, all that fun stuff that'll help get the podcast seen, and it's always appreciated. Also, if you are a small business or a big business, I do have ad space, so if you're interested in that, you can shoot me an email at creepycases.spookyspaces@gmail.com, and I can send you over all of my ad packages, as I do offer different tiers. With all of that mouthful being said, let's start on this week's spooky space. So, in the 16th century, the area that is now known as Greenwich Village was called Sapo-Kanakan by the natives who lived there. In the 1630s, Dutch settlers cleared the area and planted crops, naming the town Noordwijk. Freed slaves also lived here, farming their own lands. Now, in 1664, the English first settled after their expedition of New Amsterdam, and in 1713, this is the first known reference of the area being referred to as Greenwich, and this is named after the Dutch, meaning green district. In the 1780s, the city purchased 8 acres of land for a potter's field and a public gallows. The potter's field closed in 1826, and that area is actually now Washington Square Park. In the 1840s, Greenwich Village was home to some of the most stylish of times. The chic and elite women in Victorian dresses and men in starched collars took residence in the blocks of neat row houses called brownstones. And these were located on the west side of lower Manhattan to accommodate the middle class merchants and tradesmen. Now, the area actually still holds a very strong sense of community, and preservation is a major focus. And it's absolutely beautiful. I've been a couple of times, and I really loved it. Now, one such brownstone was given the name House of Death after taking the 4th spot on the most haunted houses in America list. Now, I always, kind of take that with a grain of salt because there's a lot of places that are, oh, we're the, most haunted hotel, we're the most haunted house, we're the most haunted cemetery. But this one I think could very much be very high on the list. In 1856, number 14 West 10th Street, a 4-story single-family revival Greek brownstone located near Washington Square Park was built. An elegant, beautiful home that holds sad and terrifying stories. Now, none of the sources that I looked into, and I looked into a lot, I couldn't find the original owners, like who they were, but in the 1880s, the widow of James Borman Johnston, he founded the Metropolitan Underground Railroad, the Reading Room Library, and the 10th Street Studio. She moved her daughters and herself into the home after he had passed away. Now, they reported hearing marching sounds coming from vacant parts of the home, but that's all that they really said that they encountered. Now, some say the home has a cloud of bad luck that just kind of hangs over it, and I totally kind of relate to that. Now, this is claimed to have started around 1897 when Fred H. Andrew, he was the owner at the time, was riding his bike when he hit 8-year-old William Murtha, resulting in William breaking a leg and Andrew being arrested for reckless bicycle riding. Now, just a few years later, from 1900 to 1901, Samuel Langhorne Clemens, the author, better known as Mark Twain, known for his books, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, The Mysterious Stranger, and Life on the Mississippi, lived in the home. Now, he was actually very outspoken about being kind of a skeptic. Like, he did not believe in ghosts or spirits of any kind. He actually even wrote a story called Ghost Story, which was kind of a jest towards the spirit world. Although, one night while Mr. Twain was sitting at home, he saw a large piece of wood kindling just kind of moving in the air by itself. He didn't know what to think, so he ended up shooting at it with a gun. It fell to the ground, and it also had a few drops of blood next to it. Now, Twain tried to explain the situation away, saying that he must have shot a rat that was carrying the kindling across the floor or across the room, but there was no rat to be found when he looked. And so it's kind of one of those things where it's like, where did this blood come from? I don't know much about wood kindling. Like, do they have a sap or something inside them that could look like blood? But even though Mark Twain didn't die in the home, he actually died 10 years later in Connecticut. His ghost has been seen by multiple residents in the house. And I mean, he's I would say that, oh, maybe we're just seeing a man in a white suit. But Mark Twain, I think, is pretty recognizable for all generations and ages. He's usually seen in his famous white suit on the first floor near the staircase. But in the 1930s, a mother and daughter actually saw him sitting near a window. Turned to them saying, "My name is Clemens, and I has a problem here I gotta settle." Of course, what this means is a mystery. But when Mark Twain lived at number 14 West 10th Street, he was actually on the brink of bankruptcy. He was also suffering from depression. He owed a lot of debts. So I'm wondering if the statement could be referring to that bankruptcy or debts or some kind of an agreement that he had going on with someone. But it's definitely interesting. And some wonder why he's still attached to the building. It was such a stressful and kind of a dark time for him. And considering that he didn't die in the area. So that's a question as well. And of course, I kind of want to read up on why people's why spirits and the energy attach themselves to certain spots in certain areas. Now, Charles Wetmore leased the home after Twain had moved out. Charles Wetmore was the president of several concerns, including the North American Company, and he was a leading force in the New York Yacht Club and its annual competition for the America's Cup. There's not much to know on him. He was just one of the owners at the time. Now, John Farr, a leader in the sugar industry, like I said, some of these were the most elite. So they were all leaders in some kind of industry. John Farr was a leader in the sugar industry, and he was the vice president of the Guyama Railroad as well. And he was on the board of several companies. Now, the Farrs had 2 sons and 2 daughters. The house was the scene of elegant coming out parties for both daughters, Edith and Frances. The Farrs often appeared upon the society pages of the New York Times, especially for the highly publicized and socially important marriage in 1921 of Edith to William Montague Gear Jr., who was the son of Reverend Dr. William Montague Gear, and he was the vicar emeritus of St. Paul's Chapel. Now, John Farr actually died in 1933, and 5 years later, Francis actually sold the house to the 1410 Corporation, which immediately announced its plans to convert it into a 10-apartment apartment building, 2 apartments per floor. According to the New York Post, Janice Muriel Bryant Bartell, known as Jan, who was a poet and off-Broadway performer, she had her writings published in several magazines and appeared in plays such as Bell, Book, and Candle and Night Must Fall. She and her husband, who was a restaurateur, Fred Bartell, took residence in one of the top floor apartments beginning in 1957. Now, Fred wasn't home much. His business kind of kept him out late and gone on the weekends a lot of the time. His most popular restaurant would be the Riverboat, while it was located at the Empire State Building. Now, people say they were a rather difficult couple. Fred was a World War II veteran who suffered from PTSD and was prone to outbursts, while Jan was on a little bit of the entitled side and suffered from clinical depression. Now, Jan possessed psychic powers, which seems this only made things worse with her anxiety. When they first moved into the home, she reported a monstrous moving shadow that loomed up behind her and would actually follow her throughout the apartment. She originally thought it was the presence that had followed her from the apartment they had just moved from, which was actually nearby and even on the same street. They moved from number 16 West 10th Street, where she was hearing noises, having visions, and even experienced kind of feeling oppressed by dread and foreboding. Now, Jan wrote a memoir called Spindrift, Spray from a Psychic Sea, based on her experiences in the home. Now, from feeling a brush against the back of her neck randomly, smelling of rotting odor throughout the home, she would also see the apparition of a man, and one time she reached out to touch him. She described the feeling as, quote, a substance without substance, chilly, damp, diaphanous as marsh mist, a cloud of ether. She stated her, quote, fingers freezed at the tips, numb, yet they tingled. In the split second between contact and recoil, the scent came, fragile and languorous and sweet, unbearably, cloyingly sweet. And you can definitely tell she was a writer. She said that food the couple didn't purchase, already rotting, would suddenly appear in the middle of the kitchen table. Her dog would become aggressive towards a specific chair, but would also become anxious and loud and kind of nervous in rooms that were empty. She said that there were shadows the light wouldn't touch no matter how hard she tried. Furniture would move around on its own, and a crashing glass sound would follow her in different rooms, just kind of throughout the apartment. So she brought in Hans Holzer. And if that name sounds familiar, Hans was a paranormal expert and medium who has written over 140 books on his investigations. And if you are into paranormal investigations or the paranormal or spirit or medium or psychic or anything like that, I definitely recommend reading Hans Holzer. His most well known would be the Amityville home, which he visited with Ethel Johnson Myers in 1977. If you would like to hear more about the Amityville home, you can check out the episode that I did called Amityville Hoax or Horror. Or is it Amityville Horror or Hoax? I think it's Amityville Horror or Hoax. But his visit uncovered things that sound as if they are right out of an Edgar Allan Poe story. He said that he could feel spirits that were stuck under the floorboards. A young girl with curly hair, blue eyes, and a small nose. A small gray cat. A woman in a white dress who died of melancholia and delirium, and even an aborted child who belonged to a widow of the war. Which during his visit, Jan went into a trance, possessed with the spirit of 19-year-old Renee Mallison, who was born in 1848. Now, Renee actually blamed President Lincoln for killing her husband, Henry McDermott, because he made him fight in the Civil War, saying that she had also aborted her child. Now, Holzer told Renee to go, leave these people in peace. And this sent Jan/Renee into a rage, and she began screaming, "Never! I will never leave here. They will have to go. This is my home. I will never leave." Now, after an unsuccessful cleansing of the home, Jan just didn't feel safe, and she felt the house had actually poisoned her. But after 7 years of living through what she described as some of the worst torture, the couple was finally able to move from the home, even though she said that the presence had attached itself to her and she also experienced some otherworldly activity in her next house. Now, sadly, in 1974, shortly after her memoir was published, Jan died of mysterious circumstances, which led some to believe she committed suicide due to her depressive episodes. However, nobody was really able to confirm or deny if the way she passed was due to suicide or if it was something a little more sinister. Now, the next story that I'm about to tell you, I must stress the listener discretion advisement at this point, as it deals with child abuse and the murder of a young girl. So if you are not comfortable listening to that, or if you have the little ears around, I would definitely maybe pause and listen to this later when you're alone, or I would recommend skipping this part and kind of moving on to the next part of the episode. Now, November 1st, 1987, 6 p.m., Joel Steinberg was getting ready to attend a business meeting when his 6-year-old daughter, Lisa Steinberg, asked if she could go along with him. Now, actually, before I get into this, let me kind of explain the background. Lisa Steinberg was born Elizabeth Launders in 1981 to 19-year-old Michelle Launders and her 20-year-old boyfriend. Now, they weren't really financially stable. They were both in school and, working, but not really able to provide for a child. Now, instead of aborting, they looked into adoption options. And through this process, they were introduced to Joel Steinberg, a lawyer who they were told has handled quite a few adoptions. Well, he assured her that Lisa would have a great life. Now, Michelle really didn't want to give Lisa up, but she knew that she wouldn't be able to provide the life that she deserved, so she signed the papers. Sadly, this would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. Now, Steinberg never actually went through the legal adoption process, and this was most likely because he wanted to avoid the mandatory home checks, including an interview with his girlfriend, Hedda Nussbaum, that come along with adopting a child. So, since this never happened, Lisa grew up with Joel Steinberg as her father and Hedda Nussbaum as her mother. She was described as a loving, caring, and highly intelligent little girl. It's not known when the child abuse began. Apparently, Steinberg had been abusing Hedda for years. And even though neighbors tried to help out and tried to call, for some reason, just nothing was ever done. Back to that fateful night. Joel Steinberg was getting ready for a business meeting when Lisa came in and asked if she could go with him. Now, for some reason, this set him off on a rampage. He beat Lisa so bad that she fell unconscious, and he carried her out to the room to Hedda and left for his meeting like nothing happened. When he came home that evening around 10 p.m., he ended up partaking in cocaine. And the next morning, around 6:30 a.m., Hedda noticed that Lisa wasn't breathing, so she called 911. First responders to the apartment found Lisa on the kitchen floor, naked and comatose. Her hair was matted and filthy, and her feet were covered in grime. Now, their 16-month-old son, Mitchell, also illegally adopted, was covered in urine, drinking spoiled milk, and tied to a makeshift playpen in the living room. They noted that Hedda had two black eyes, a busted lip, and her nose was actually split open and flattened. And this is probably why he didn't go through the legal adoption process, because um, this would have all been, found out way before this happened, which I think, would have been better. But so they rushed Lisa to St. Vincent's, where they reported new and old bruises. Her brain was swollen and she had blunt force trauma. On November 4th, they announced Lisa brain dead, and on November 5th, they made the tough decision to remove her from life support, where she passed only 15 minutes later. Now, it's been said that the lights flicker and people can hear a little girl giggling on the second floor where the family lived. Could it be Lisa just kind of coming back to have a little bit of fun? Or now, Hedda wasn't charged, as the court decided that she was so physically and mentally incapacitated when the incident happened, and she is the one who called 911 to help. They felt that she wasn't responsible for Lisa's death. Now, Steinberg, on the other hand, was convicted of first-degree manslaughter. He was sentenced to 17 years in prison, and he was released on mandatory parole in 2004. He now lives in Harlem, where he basically mooches and bums off of other people. And let me tell you what, he is an absolute delight piece of garbage. When asked about Lisa in an interview, he said, quote, "What did she die of? She died of pulling the plug," end quote. When asked if he could say anything to Lisa, he said, quote, "I'll never kill you again. I'll never beat you up every day. And I'll never make you a tortured tot in a house of horror," end quote. He also said that he's not happy because he lost the best years of his life while he was in prison. Let me tell you what. Now, some wonder if the activity could be spreading or if the entire street is affected by the paranormal. Because a photographer and musician who lives in a nearby building, who wanted to stay anonymous, so he used the name Dennis, said that he has experienced flickering lights, ghostly female figures in long gowns wandering the corridor, disappearing through doors from room to room. He tells of how there was one day he was photographing a dancer in his living room, and he left her alone for just a moment, and she was startled to see a woman in a long flowing gown come into the room, a cat following her. The dancer packed up her stuff and ran. Other girls that he has photographed said they won't even come back to the building because of seeing the figures when they've been alone as well. And it's funny because this isn't even at number 14. This is a different home. Now, Dennis was actually out on a date with a girl one time, and they stopped at a bookstore called The Strand, and they actually started talking about the happenings, and a copy of Spindrift, Spray from a Psychic Sea, fell off the shelf into his date's hand. So he thought, hey, this must be a sign. I'll purchase it and I'll take it home. He has owned around 10 copies because the book keeps disappearing. It's been said that the antique stairwell gets most of the ghostly activity. Don't forget that Mark Twain likes to pop up there every time. But I still wonder if the whole street is, I don't want to use the word cursed. Let's say afflicted. I still wonder if the whole street is afflicted with paranormal activity because Emma Lazarus, author of The New Colossus, has actually been seen around number 18 West 10th Street. Mystery writer Dashiell Hammett and his partner, Lily Hellman, who wrote Little Foxes, are also both seen in a home on the same street. And Edgar Allan Poe lived in number 17 when his marriage proposal was rejected, and there has been some activity in there as well. Now, I know the building is a private residence, but if you have lived there, or if you know someone who has lived there, or someone who lives there, I would love to hear any stories or experiences. And I'll actually be taking a trip to New York. I'm not sure exactly when yet, but I'll be coming up again. So if anybody might be able to, get me into where I can just look at the lobby, or just kind of I don't want to go into anybody's home or anything like that, but, maybe just kind of walk in, take a look around, walk out, real in out type job. But yeah, I would love to do that. Also, if you or anyone you know is the victim of any kind of abuse, domestic abuse, child abuse, any kind, please, please, please look into the resources in your area and reach out and get help. And on that note, I will see you next crime. Thank you for listening to Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces, a Pizza and Pigtails production, created and hosted by Cassiopeia. Don't forget, you can find new episodes of the creepiest and spookiest content every Tuesday. If you subscribe to the Patreon or the Anchor pages, which you can do for as little as $5 a month, you get access to bonus episodes every other week, a merchandise discount good for all purchases at the Wick and Faye shop at pizzaandpigtails.com, and you get a thank you swag box full of Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces merchandise. If you'd like to support without subscribing, you can do so through the Cash App and Venmo links. Be sure to follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and all the socials for future news and updates. And don't forget to like, share, and comment. Bring your fellow fiends in on those conversations. And as always, I will see you next crime.